I don't like talking about spirituality. I will admit it. I haven't got the patience nor the acting skills to even begin to pretend that I'm interested in awakenings, revelations, or yet another discussion on the synchronistic nature of the universe. But don't get me wrong, I'm still a deeply spiritual person, and I feel truly fortunate to build a relationship with God on a day-to-day basis to the best of my ability, but I think we're missing the point when it comes to exploring, understanding, and integrating the transpersonal aspects of our identity. Recent studies show that the majority of people under the age of 40 identify as spiritual but not religious. And yet the majority of public discourse that I'm seeing seems to be shifted more towards virtue signaling our spirituality rather than actually having the virtues of being genuinely spiritual. My issue with spirituality isn't spirituality. It's with the way that we're approaching the idea and the performance rather than actually honoring the tradition and the practice, because I'm not even talking about the performances of going to a good concert or a good stage show and it's very entertaining and very fulfilling. I feel like I'm drowning underneath a sea of yoga mats and crystal collections and suffocating beneath Instagram quotes and religious iconography scattered across shelves from across the world, and it's just not the point. Every major religious tradition in every significant flavor, from conservative Christianity to radical Sufi Islamic practice and everywhere in between, points towards the single note that service and self-surrender are the best likely options for anyone who's truly committed to growing their transpersonal or spiritual identity. In a single sentence, it seems like the true note of God is crawling out of your own arse and actually doing something with your life that would help other people rather than jibber-jabbering about the fact that you are now awakened and everyone else is a sheep who's caught in the matrix, or insert the blank kind of accusation. This isn't everyone, but this is what I see happening in the major public discourse, particularly on Instagram, particularly on YouTube, and it's really missing the point. What I want to do in this video is emphasize that real true note that every tradition points towards: service. Because I feel this to be truly the guiding light in my existence. Only the other week, actually last week, I took some time off from being in this library and I went to a quaint little church in the Cotswolds, a rural area of England, and I was hit and simultaneously stirred with that whispered presence of my soul as I walked between the pews and felt the hope and the grief of 900 years of service and celebration and mourning and loss, that church in particular, almost 1,000 years old. And I lit a candle in the prayer room. I don't know if I should share this, I won't share it in particular. You know, when you can go into the prayer room and you can light a little candle, I'll use this little light, you kind of get the light and it's not turning on, but let's imagine that, you know, you light the candle and then you put it on the stand and you say a prayer. I didn't pray for myself. I prayed for my ability to go back to work later in that week and show up for my clients with renewed energy and the ability to do something meaningful that week. Maybe you shouldn't share your prayers and you can criticize me of being self-righteous and here I am holier than thou, I've got a martyrdom complex or some kind of savior complex. That's your projection if you want to have it, but I think it taps into the real essence of what it means to be of service, which is that you're not doing it for you. There'll be selfish intentions and there'll be many ways to go about service, but fundamentally, it's not about you. So let's go into this topic a little deeper. I've actually got a wonderful question today in today's library Q&A from, I think, Zorro, a very interesting name. Zorro Skolgar. I feel like I'm being dropped into a fantasy novel just reading this question, which for context was a response to my previous video a couple weeks ago on appropriate service, hence the word appropriate, but we'll unpack it. Let's read the question. I really appreciate your work, as always, and this one sure hits home. Thank you. How shall we discover what is the appropriate earthy service that gives back to the appropriate people and all the other respects appropriately? How do we know what service to offer? I believe you are talking about giving something, some kind of service in a concrete and committed form, as opposed to randomly and when you feel like it. For instance, you aren't speaking solely of charity giving and just doing things for people when they need or ask. Rather, you are talking about some kind of service of a different and more committed nature here, aren't you? Could you both list some concrete examples as well as help us to understand or recognize how we'd know which of these would be us? Thank you. Zoram, thank you for the question. These are the types of questions that really feel like banquets for me because there's at least 12 different directions I could take this, and I've really reflected for the last few days how to make this the punchiest and most truthful video that I could make. The specific message here is, how do I know? How can I know basically what my life's purpose is in relation to my spiritual integrity and making an impact on the world? Well, there are two things I can suggest. The first thing is quite simple, very difficult, but quite simple. And the second thing is actually quite complex and actually easy. It's almost an inversion of the two, but let me explain. The first thing that you can do is this. You can wipe your own eyes. That's the symbolic literalization of doing the trauma work. Childhood trauma, accumulated baggage, and all of these painful experiences gradually close our perception, and we cannot see where we need to go. It is the equivalent of squinting your way through the world. The reason I've dedicated this channel, at least 80% of this channel, towards trauma work and healing in regards to overcoming things like addiction, abuse, self-hating mechanisms, and shameful patterns, is because every wound is a weight on your eyelids, and you will not be able to see the path that you need to go down, or even look clearly in the mirror and see your own true reflection if you are clouded by the fog of trauma. You will have heavy eyes. You will be seeing through maybe one eye at best, and when you've got one eye shut, you cannot see depth. It's a pretty good metaphor. I'm glad that it's coming through spontaneously because it's a bit of a hard thing to communicate without losing the emotional thrust of just how important it is to do your trauma work. I can't give you the direct step-by-step answer for how to do anything other than just doing the trauma work in regards to making the commitment to read the books and doing the work over multiple years and patiently going through the process. That's it. It's incredibly simple. There's many modalities, but you need to wipe your eyes. You will not see clearly, and it's arguably a waste of your own time to think that you're seeing clearly if you still haven't gone through that process. But what happens if you're in the stage 2? Let's imagine that you're already a few years deep in your self-healing journey. You've already gone through the major somatic releases, and you've already got a pretty good spiritual life. What comes next? I don't know. I don't know. That's the honest answer. I wish I could stand here, having reflected on some of the books I thought would be most significant for this video, and have some kind of marvelous, inspiring quote that would awaken your soulful voice within you and help you know the type of service, the appropriate service, to the appropriate people, in the appropriate context, at the appropriate time. But nobody can do that for you. And that's arguably one of the most interesting elements of being human right now. You get to decide, or you get to be in contact with a deeper part of you, which has already decided. If you've wiped clean your eyes and if you've cut away the weight of the past, you will be lighter, you will be clearer, and you will be able to hear those subtle signals and all of the synchronistic phenomena which are pointing you towards the lane that you need to go down. And it may not be a fixed mission in the sense of going off to do a very definite thing for the rest of your life. What I see happening in mentorships is that people typically have a base idea. They have, at the very least, a subtle spark inside of their heart which would indicate the potential avenue. For someone, this might be as simple as being a school teacher. For someone else, it could be the complete opposite avenue of being a firefighter or being a nurse or a doctor. For someone else, it's a more traditionally spiritual lifestyle. They're a healing professional, they go down a shamanistic pathway, or they become the teacher at the ashram. There are hundreds of different particularities, but the energetic subcurrent is self-knowledge and self-understanding based on having a clear vessel which can receive all of that otherworldly transpersonal energy which you're trying to prioritize in your life. And from that point, as long as you make one step at a time, based on as far as you can see, and maybe you'll get a glimpse of the future, this kind of spontaneous awakening experience that I almost poked fun at in the very beginning of this video. They are genuine. I do see the value. Some people get a vision of where they might be in 20 years, and then they work backwards. And how cool is that? If you can find your appropriate lane of service by getting a flash in a dream or a sober-minded vision, I don't recommend psychedelics for a variety of reasons. I will definitely make a video on this in the future. If you can get a dream or a sober-minded vision or a journal reflection of the kind of service that you would like to bring forwards, or at very least, the person that you might be, having lived that lifestyle with integrity, devotion, discipline, and surrender, then that's surely worth pursuing. One of the major traps that I see, to wrap this video up, is the classic self-consuming, self-obsessed, spiritual, grandiose, narcissistic, parasitic way of relating to our transpersonal identities, which again dominates the public discourse on this topic. I don't think it's useful to be obsessed with your personal practice if that personal practice isn't going to be the accelerator or the foundational safe place to then be able to go out and emerge into the world with something which is meaningful and tangible. Subtle activism and prayers and thoughts are definitely a thing. There's research, very interesting research, that shows the impact of prayer on healing. But you've also got decades of daylight. And if you don't know what you're going to do with those decades of daylight, or you spend half of it focused obsessively on yourself and refuse your neighbor, or your family if you're in close contact with your family, or your loved one if you have a loved one, or your group of friends, or your community, situations being independent to you, if you're ignoring that opportunity and fundamentally, unskillfully, I'll be honest, unskillfully looping on yourself past those first few years of self-healing inquiry, if you're about 5, 10, or maybe even longer years deep into this process, and you haven't externalized that just yet, you might be missing the genuine opportunity to take the advice of all of the best religious traditions on the world, which is to surrender your self-interest, and just like the parent who gives birth or fathers a child, this shift happens in their brain where they know it's not about them. It's only at that point, as continued through multiple months and multiple, often difficult and repetitive actions of serving in a day-to-day sense, being the nurse who honestly doesn't feel very spiritual in their day-to-day life. You've got complaining patients, you may be around death and sickness or difficult colleagues or a stressful work environment. You might be the firefighter who has a lot of tedium and a lot of process and then occasionally massive amounts of trauma in the work environment. As long as you're moving from that central star of spiritual integrity, the outer appearance of what you do in the world doesn't necessarily matter too much. As long as it's ethically aligned, if you're going to cheat and steal and kill, and obviously, I hope that's obvious, that I'm not talking about those professions. If you're going to go and do shady things on the internet and scam people, or you're going to go and hurt people in real life, that's not what I'm talking about. But more or less, everything that has a material wrapping, as long as it's charged with that spiritual, self-identified, soulful essence, because you've wiped your eyes clean, and you can see at least the next few steps of where you should go, and you can walk with faith, you're living with spiritual integrity. And it will mean a continual practice of self-healing and self-regulation to be able to expand your sphere of influence. And what a wonderful journey that might be. For me, the reason that I lit that candle in that little Cotswolds rural church last week is not because I wanted to pray for something for my own healing or my own, I don't know, I wasn't trying to manifest a new Lamborghini. I wasn't looking to move to a tropical location where I can have indulgent experiences. I lit my candle to try and hopefully calibrate myself to being a little bit more receptive to the grace of God to do often difficult work in private one-to-one spaces and be able to continue the process of doing exactly what I'm doing right now and making free videos for years on YouTube as part of my spiritual integrity. You can think of that what you will. You can see me sharing this story as an incredibly grandiose or self-obsessed thing to do. I don't see it that way, and I hope that me sharing this brings forwards some sense of inspiration of what you could do to find your appropriate lane. To answer the question in full, I cannot be the man, and no book, no text, no external religious teaching can actually give you that. There is a real truth to self-awakening which requires introspective practice and a real sense of self-discovery. But just make sure that you step back out into the material world before you get lost in those delusional repetitions which genuinely dim your spiritual potential. It's about connection and it's about service. I want you to choose a lane of service which selfishly infuses you with energy. I'm not choosing to go and be a firefighter because that doesn't fit my personal temperament or what I like to do with my energy. I'm also not interested and clearly didn't go down the traditional therapy path of staying in school or maybe being a therapist for the NHS. I did it my way based on a progressive wiping of the eyes and that listening with the third ear, and if you want to get new age, looking with the third eye and having a very wonderful meditative spiritual opening journey. I went through all of those things, but fundamentally it's everyday practice, day-to-day relationship with God as embodied in your relationship to yourself and as defined by your loving, compassionate, respectful, continual relating to the people that you're here to support without going too far into a savior complex or becoming spiritually codependent on some kind of messiah complex, which, again, is a common pitfall. I hope this video has helped, and at the very least, just continue to walk the path and know that if you have a genuine conviction that things are working out for you and that you are being led in the direction which is at least within 10%, more or less the right direction, or if you know that you're in the wrong lane, do that work to move yourself. If that's all you get from this video, then I've done my job. And I'll see you in the next video where we discuss collective consciousness and actually a very interesting playful idea of should you even bother to help people? It's basically me turning this video on its head. I'll see you over there.